Good morning to you. I'm looking at some verses, very well-known verses, from the middle of Lamentations chapter 3. Lamentations is a very sombre, very sad book. It comes after Jeremiah the prophet, who prophesied the terrible destruction that was going to come to the land. He wrote 5 chapters, and in the middle of the 3rd chapter, right in the centre of the book, are the words from which one of the most famous hymns has been written. I'm going to read the hymn in a minute, but let me read the text. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait patiently, quietly, for the salvation of the Lord. In the middle of this lament, Jeremiah had prophesied that the nation would fall, that Jerusalem would be taken. He had foretold it. And he'd also foretold that after 70 years there would be restoration and a new founding of the nation. But he is taken up with the terrible situation. When you read it, awful things were happening in the nation. He'd watched them all. He'd not run away from it all. He'd endured it with his people. And he could see that if they'd only listened, if they'd only turned to the Lord, the disaster might not have happened. And it's interesting that the 2 verses before those lovely verses about the steadfast love of the Lord, it says, 3 verses before, remember my affliction and my bitterness, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually thinks of it and is bowed down within me. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. So what he's saying is, he's been thinking and watching and thinking and watching and terribly distressed by the awful things that are happening around him and that he's seen happening, the terrible death and destruction, the war, the starvation, the suffering. And he's continually looked at. My soul continually thinks of it and is bowed down within me. Next verse, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. He makes a choice to stop thinking about the awful things, but to focus on the Lord. And this is a choice he makes. And immediately he does this. The first words are, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. And we may find ourselves in all sorts of difficult situations. And the more we focus on the difficult situation, the less hope we have. The more we see, and it may have been going on for a long while, as it had for Jeremiah, been going on for years. It was not just a 9 days wonder of terrible things happening. It had been going on. A terrible decline, a terrible circumstance, sieges. There were 3 attacks on Jerusalem. 3 times the Babylonians came against Jerusalem and conquered it, and then were drawn away by something or other, some other circumstance, and people were taken away into exile, and more destruction happened. It was over a long period, and it did fill his mind, if he let it. What we have to continually do when we are in difficult situations is to look to the Lord and remember his faithfulness rather than look at the circumstances. Because God has promised he will never leave us. He has promised he will always be there. He has given us Jesus. We have more hope than Jeremiah had. Jeremiah didn't know Jesus. He didn't know his salvation was coming. He didn't know that God was going to send his own son to die for him. But he knew how faithful God was, and that despite what it looked like, God's love had not stopped. God's love never stopped. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. This is our stand. This needs to be your stand in whatever's going on with you. Everything else in your life can fluctuate and change. You can fluctuate and change. Your friend, your spouse, your neighbour, your parent, your child, everything can change. Nothing is constant in this world. It's forever changing. And suddenly, sometimes the change is sudden, sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it feels like circumstances will never improve. And you know, there's a word in the scripture for that. If you look at dear Habakkuk, only 3 chapters of Habakkuk, he's one of the minor prophets. At the end of Habakkuk he says, though the fig tree do not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will joy in the God of my salvation. God the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like hinds' feet. He makes me tread upon my high places. Habakkuk says, even if there's nothing in the field, even if I've got absolutely nothing, there's no fruit on the tree, there's no flock in the stall, there's no herd in the stalls, there's no flock in the field, the produce has failed. Even though everything fails, God does not fail and will not fail me. And I will rejoice in the Lord. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou for ever wilt be. Summer and winter, springtime and harvest, sun, moon and stars in their courses above, join with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy and love. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow, blessings all mine with 10,000 beside. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. That hymn says it all. Have a great day. Be blessed. I'll see you again tomorrow.